From the BBC World Service, in association with ABC and All India Radio, this is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, entering our second lockdown here, combined with the first real fog of the autumn. I pulled the curtains back this morning and felt like I was back in Sydney last year, as if it was a smog or a smoke shrouding the street. But no, it is indeed fog, and the day's got a real wintry feel about it. And forgive me if I'm a little bit bleary, because as with many people, staying up late, getting up early, following the US election, a second screen with friends, early morning coffee and bagels yesterday. But yeah, interesting times in the world, that's for sure.
Hi there, Ali. Yes, well, I had my frankfurters and bud yesterday at a US election party, and I'm Jim Maxwell here in Sydney, but I'm just a happy Joe Biden my time, waiting for the cricket season to come around. We've got the BBL programs out. India are going to be here. I mean, things can always go wrong again. But at this stage, we're getting more and more optimistic that we're going to see some cricket later in the year between India and Australia. But we're not seeing much WBBL in Sydney because it just keeps raining.
You know, it's strange how in India there's so much coverage about the US elections. And you know, it's almost like I keep wondering why in the US will there ever be any coverage of the Indian election to that extent? Perhaps not. But I'm glad that at least as far as the state of Karnataka is concerned, our cricketers are back in training at all levels, which is a wonderful start, even though all of us seem to be very mystified about what exactly we are on the COVID curve. However, no COVID problems, luckily, at the IPL, and there was this frenetic action to get to the Final Four, and we are now into, of course, the business end.
We can't trump the fact that your cricketers are starting to get back into action. No, there we go. That's all I've got. But right. We've got some squads out for England's white ball tour to South Africa. So the England team gearing up to get back in action as well, which is good to know. But we're going to kick off this week with the closest of playoff races in the IPL. Another tight contest. After each team had played 14 matches, only 6 points separated the team at the top of the table, Mumbai Indians, from the team at the bottom, Rajasthan Royals. The other teams making it to the playoffs were Delhi Capitals, Royal Challengers Bangalore and Sunrisers Hyderabad. I mean, perhaps the biggest surprise for me overall has been the fact that two of the IPL's biggest teams didn't make it through. Kolkata Knight Riders and Chennai Super Kings have 5 IPL titles between them. And I know we sort of touched on this last week a little bit as regards CSK, but Charu, what in your view went wrong this year for both those sides?
Injuries, pullouts, and although I don't have data for this, I think they both missed their home support because the Eden Gardens for the KKR and Chennai and a lot of the south of India for CSK is such a big factor in driving them towards those fantastic performances. Both have been behind on occasion and finally made it to the Final Four. Of course, CSK far more successfully. But I do think they missed that high level of support, which is so proximate when they are playing in India. Apart from the obvious business that the CSK missed a lot of its players. Suresh Raina left before the tournament started. Harbhajan Singh left. They are match winners for CSK. Dhoni, of course, we cannot possibly expect him to play at that level of cricket when he's playing only 2 months of the year. So I think they were certainly underdone. You might also remember the CSK had this big COVID scare when the team went to the UAE and they had to additionally quarantine themselves for another 2 weeks or whatever it was. So they were certainly underprepared. Their junior ranks, who were not given much of a longer run in the past, were suddenly out there and had to perform, and they couldn't. Once they got behind, they just lost momentum. KKR, of course, were far more narrowly behind the race. And I think the big injury to Andre Russell was one important cause because he's such a valuable all-rounder. And there was that early, what should we call it, protest or a problem with Sunil Narayan's action, which is why he had to change it mid-stream, and he's such a valuable bowler for them. So, yeah, they kind of lost steam early on in the tournament, and it just could not recover. But maybe they will regroup next year. Can't count them out. And if it's in India, then their level of support is going to be a huge benefit to both those teams.
Yeah, it'd be amazing, won't it, if it's back in India next year. There was a significant contribution, Jim, from an Aussie this week. David Warner smashing an unbeaten 85 off some 58 balls. It helped Hyderabad get that very last playoff spot. Did his knock make the agenda on your weekly coffee mornings, or were some outstanding bowling figures from the Sheffield Shield taking up a little bit of talk time?
It's hard to have cricket in the headlines here at the moment because of this pandemic, which has pushed football into summer. And we've just had State of Origin Rugby League the other night. So it's hard to get away from that. And also, despite the fact the Wallabies are getting crushed by the All Blacks, there's another game coming up on the weekend. We need India to get here so we can really get excited about cricket. As for the IPL, the main word out of it is that Warner and Cummins are going to be cooked for the series against India because they've decided to play in the IPL. You can't blame them if they're getting a couple of $1 million each, I suppose.
It's going to be a dilemma for a lot of teams, isn't it? It's how to manage the volume of cricket, particularly at the moment when everything is so condensed necessarily because of COVID. Well, we've talked about India. That's a good segue into our first guest this week, and it'll become apparent in a moment just why. Our guest, I'm going to say, is one of the most important international cricketers of all time.
Here we go. Dawson comes up and bowls to Waugh, who drives through the offside for his 100. That is extraordinary. And Steve Waugh, a man of little emotion, can barely restrain himself now. His helmet's off. Oh, he's waving his bat. Alex Stewart shakes his hand. You could not have scripted anything more remarkable than what we have seen here this afternoon.
Wow, I've just got goosebumps listening to that. That is, of course, Australia captain Steve Waugh at the time, scoring a century off the final ball of the day against England in the Sydney Ashes Test of 2003. It was one of 32 centuries and a joint record 168 tests for Australia during a period in which the Aussies were the dominant force in world cricket. I'd love to say I was there for that knock in Sydney, but as a 23-year-old spectator, that was the one day of the test where we had a trip pre-booked to visit the Blue Mountains, so I missed it. But we can speak to the man who lived it and did it because Steve Waugh joins us now. Steve, great to have you with us. Did that bring back some memories?
Yeah, it did. I was just sitting here listening and that sort of transported me back to that couple of amazing minutes of my life where I took 4 off the last ball, and it was something I dreamt of after watching Doug Bowlers do it in a Perth Test match. You Bob Willis for a 6 on the last ball of the day, and as a young kid watching that, I thought, geez, how good's that? You get a 6 off the last ball of the day. And there I was all those years later with the opportunity to do the same thing.
That innings, it was so significant, wasn't it? Because you equalled Don Bradman's record of 29 Test hundreds for Australia at a time when actually your position was a little under threat.
Yeah, look, for me it was about proving to myself that I was still good enough to be at that level. I didn't doubt that, but there was obviously a lot of conjecture in the media and with the selectors probably thinking about the future. And yeah, so it was certainly under intense pressure. And but for some reason, I went out to bat that day with a very clear mind. I brushed everything aside and thought, I really don't need to prove this to anyone else. I don't really need to prove it to myself. Just go out and enjoy the experience. And it was one of those days where it just sort of fell into place. And I knew I was going to score runs as long as I concentrated. And it sort of it just unfolded, and I was calm and relaxed and had composure. And then all of a sudden, you get the chance to get the 4 off the last ball. So it just panned out perfectly.
Well, I mentioned that this interview with you is linked with India, and indeed it is, because we want to find out about a new photo book that you've done. It's called Steve Waugh, The Spirit of Cricket India, and it really does feature a remarkable selection of cricketing photographs that you have taken yourself on a recent India tour. What led to you creating this?
Look, I'd always enjoyed photography, and in any team bus, I was always at the front taking photos and looking, seeing what was happening. And the subcontinent definitely fascinated me, even from the first moment I landed back in 1986 in that famous Tide Test series. But we got to Bombay, and straight away I noticed the smell was different about India. Then you get on the team bus and you travel to the hotel, and there's cars. No one stayed in their lanes. No one stopped at pedestrian crossings. They went through red lights, and then you looked out the window. There was masses of people everywhere, and on the streets, and cats and dogs and all sorts of animals, and then kids playing cricket in every sort of nook and cranny down the alleyways, in the parks, on the beaches. And one day I wanted to come back and sort of just have the freedom to go out and walk wherever I wanted to go and take pictures of what to me is a spirit of cricket and why is cricket a religion in India. So that's what I was trying to capture through the lens of the camera.
Tell us some of the things that you saw then on this trip. What were some of the most remarkable sights that you experienced?
Well, really, every day was remarkable. We had 17 days, and it was really taking photographs from 6 in the morning to 8 at night. We had 9 plane trips to about 11, 12 cities, and I took 20,000 photos. So it was a really incredible experience. Playing cricket with the monks in front of the Himalayan mountains, that was a real highlight, and capturing those guys. Photographing the physically challenged cricketers of the Indian team, and they were amazing. A lot of those were missing limbs or had afflictions such as polio and other different things, but they were incredible athletes, and to capture them flying through the air like ninja warriors, and a lot of them were landing on these bamboo poles as a crutch when they hit the crease. That was quite awe-inspiring. Playing cricket with the blind cricketers in Bangalore was another great experience. Going to the Women's Cricket Academy up in Dharamshala was a really fantastic couple of hours spent time with those guys. And then playing cricket with the kids in the Dharavi slums. Meeting a 3-year-old boy we found on Instagram who's this batting prodigy at 3 years of age. And then we also met the oldest living first-class cricketer at the time for his 100th birthday, and Sachin Tendulkar came along to that. So it's just one highlight after another for 17 days straight it was.
Hi, Steve. This is Charu Sharma from Bangalore. You've given us a pretty good idea of what you saw when you first landed in India back in 1986, but obviously it's been a long journey since. And we all know that India is a land of incredible diversity. Give us a sense of how you've accepted the idea of India along with all its diversity in all the rest of the, well, not just cricket, but the way you now accept India. I presume you're pretty fond of it.
Yeah, look, I love going to India, and each and every time you learn something, you see something different. I never get bored. It's just an overload of your senses, and I just can't get enough of just seeing everyday life and how people get on with it. And I'm really inspired by, particularly the people who haven't got much in India. And there's probably 850 million people live below the poverty line, but they've got this amazing sense of togetherness, and they have this great spirit, and they're humble and they're welcoming, and I just really enjoyed meeting a lot of those people, and sharing their journey and why they love cricket. And a lot of the times we'd have a game of cricket afterwards, and it sort of gave me back the love of why I started playing cricket, the innocence and naivety of picking up a bat and a ball and having a game with your mates. And that seems to be the spirit of India, that people just make the most of their situation. They feel connected to the national team, and it gives them a real sense of pride that cricket is in their lives.
Now, while you're here, Steve, I mentioned earlier about the IPL and the suggestion that some of these Australian players like Cummins and Warner are cooked coming out of this. Do you think it's something that Australia should be more protective of? Their players are getting pretty well paid. I mean, how do you manage all of this demand on their talents and yet have them fresh to play in a big series like the one against India?
Oh, look, I think reality is, Jim, I think 4 overs is not going to cook you too much, Paddy Cummins, each game. I think we bowled more in our practice sessions when we were that age. I mean, I don't think it's over the top. It's T20, whilst it's an intense game, I don't think it really demands too much of you physically and mentally. It's over pretty quickly. Time away from home is probably the bigger issue, away from your family and getting a bit homesick and and out of your normal routine. That's probably the biggest thing. I don't think the workload of playing in IPL is going to damage them too much. And as you mentioned at the start, I mean, the money they're getting is incredibly good money. It would set them up for the rest of their lives. So they're not going to say no to that if they can fit it all in. But I just hope still that the priority, I'm sure it is for these guys, their priority is representing their country, particularly in a test match. And both those guys are proud Aussies, so I expect them to be not affected by it.
There are so many competing forces, aren't there, Steve, in world cricket at the moment. Where do you see Test cricket as we head in towards 2021?
Test cricket, I think, will always stay relevant as long as the leaders and the captains of each country keep advocating that it is the purest form of the game, and it's the only form of the game where you can be tested physically, technically, mentally, socially, and all these different ways. It really tests you out, and there's no other game that does that. So, and it's the only form of cricket where you can find out how good you are, and that's the reason why you take up the game, to see how good you can play it. And Test cricket is the ultimate challenge. So as long as I say, the captains and the important leaders of the game are saying that Test cricket is the very essence of the sport. I think it will survive, and there's sort of, I'm sure there's a core group of people or a lot of people out there who still love Test cricket, who love watching it. So we've just got to educate the younger people that, yes, T20's nice, one-day cricket's fantastic, but the ultimate form of the game still is Test cricket. I hope it will be here in 100 years. I'm pretty confident it will be, because there's great history associated with it, and things do go in cycles, and I think people will eventually come back in droves to watch Test cricket as long as it's entertaining and it stays relevant. Do
you feel those leaders and captains are advocating it enough at the moment? Because commercially it obviously needs to be supported as well.
Well, I know that Kohli and Tim Payne are very pro Test match cricket, so I think they're probably the leading countries at the moment in Test cricket. Obviously, you want the England captain doing the same thing, and Joe Root's been big on Test cricket. So I think right now we've got a current group of captains who are really good at doing that. Kane Williamson is really good for Test match cricket. So I think the West Indies lost their way a little bit in recent times with people like Chris Gale sort of really saying that T20 was where it was at, and the West Indies lost their way a bit. But obviously with countries like New Zealand and Sri Lanka and Pakistan and those other countries, that the payments have got to be, I think, increased for test matches in those countries. I think I'd like to see a uniform payment for all Test matches for all countries to make sure that they're compensated for playing Test match cricket. Like a minimum wage type of thing? Well, a minimum payment for a Test match, because the temptation is obviously if you're not getting paid well for Test cricket, then you're going to look at other options, and you need more than 3 or 4 strong Test match nations. You need 8 to 10 really good Test playing countries. 12 months away, finally, Steve, from the men's Ashes. You were in the dressing room last time round. Do you think Australia are well placed to retain once again? Oh, I think so. Look, our team is developing, and it's on the improve, and it's a solid bunch right now, and then you throw into the mix Pekoski and Cameron Green, and there's quite a few fringe players around who are developing nicely. Swepson with his leg spinners come on, and we've got bowlers who can take 20 wickets, and with Labuschagne coming through in the batting department, another world-class player. It's a really solid-looking team, so I think Australia will be well-placed over the next 12 to 18 months to beat pretty much anyone they come up against. Steve, it's been great to speak to you. We're looking forward to seeing how the Aussies go against India, but we will also look forward to your book as well, Steve Waugh, Spirit of Cricket India. Thanks so much for being with us on Stumped. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Well, that's it for this week's Stumped on All India Radio. Thanks to my co-hosts, Charu Sharma and Jim Maxwell, and to you for listening. Join us again next time. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.